I'll never forget the moment he walked in all swagger and no substance, a man who thought he could rewrite a company's soul without reading its code, Maxwell Granger Max. As he insisted, strode into Nexora Systems Seattle headquarters, like he'd just bought the place, his Rolex catching the fluorescent light, his tailored suit screaming ambition. I watched from my corner of the open-plan office, arms crossed, coffee cooling in my mug. 7 years at this tech firm, and I'd seen egos come and go. But Max, he was a storm waiting to break, and I was the one he'd never see coming. I'm Penelope Harper, 32, Director of Systems Architecture at Nexora, or at least I was. That Monday morning, I'd built the backbone of this company, a back-end infrastructure so streamlined it saved us from a failed acquisition 5 years ago. It wasn't just code. It was a patented system, my name etched in the U.S. Patent Office, a detail tucked into my employment contract like a hidden ace. I'd outlasted 2 CEOs, 3 restructurings, and a buyout that nearly gutted us. I knew the game: keep your head down, your work sharp, and your leverage quiet. But Max didn't know leverage. He didn't know me. He stood at the front of the conference room, all 6 feet of him, flashing a grin that never touched his eyes. "Call me Max," he said, voice smooth as a sales pitch. "I like things lean, fast, and efficient. We're doing great things starting now." The room clapped, a weak, obligatory sound, like kids at a school assembly. I stayed silent, my pen tapping the edge of my notebook. He talked about vision and disruption, buzzwords that meant nothing without context. Nexora wasn't a startup. It was a machine, and I'd built its engine. But Max didn't care about engines. He cared about headlines. That first week was a masterclass in chaos. Max canceled our project review meetings I'd run for years to keep our systems airtight, and replaced them with vision strategy syncs that felt like TED Talks gone wrong. By Thursday, he'd fired 3 mid-level managers, 2 via email, their desks cleared before lunch. Then he started tweaking our flagship software product, my product without a clue about its architecture. I'd designed it to be secure, scalable, a fortress of code that kept 82% of Nexora's operations humming. The previous CEO had called it my legacy, urging me to patent it. "Penelope," he'd said, "if you leave, we'll beg you to come back." Max hadn't read that memo. He hadn't read anything. By the second week, he called me tech lead instead of my actual title, a small jab that spoke volumes. In meetings, he'd cut me off mid-sentence, his eyes sliding past me to praise junior staff for ideas I'd pitched months ago. Classic power play: demean, discredit, dismiss. I kept my cool, my voice steady, but I started documenting everything, every decision, every email. Then came Friday morning. Max strolled into my office, leaning against the doorframe like he was auditioning for a corporate drama. "Penelope, can we talk?" he said, his tone clipped. I gestured to the chair across my desk. He didn't sit. "I'll be blunt," he said, as if honesty were a gift. "You've been here a long time, maybe too long. Things are changing, and we need people who move faster." I raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch. "Meaning," he continued, "I'm letting you go, effective immediately. Your position is redundant. HR has your severance paperwork." His words were so rehearsed, so smug, I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned back, studying him. He had no idea. No idea I held the patent that powered Nexora's core. No idea. One clause in my contract could stop his world cold. But I didn't say that. I smiled. Calm, deliberate. "Understood," I said, standing to offer my hand. He didn't take it, just nodded and turned away, tossing one last barb over his shoulder. "I'm not spending a dime on someone who peaked years ago." My smile didn't falter. "Good luck, Max," I said, my voice steady. He paused, thrown by my calm, then left. I packed slowly a plant I'd kept alive for years, a USB with team photos, a notebook filled with system diagrams. As I walked through the office, heads turned, some averted, others offering sympathetic nods. No one spoke. Fear spreads quietly in places like this. By the time I reached my car, my hands trembled. Not from sadness, but from adrenaline. I wasn't angry yet. I was curious. How long until they realized what they'd done? I knew the answer. Monday. The weekend after Max fired me felt like the calm before a Seattle storm heavy with the promise of chaos. I didn't tell anyone, not my brother who'd say I worked too hard, Not my best friend who'd arrive with Pinot Noir and a vendetta. Not my ex who once called me married to my code. I needed silent space to think. Friday night, I walked through Pike Place Market past shuttered stalls and dim streetlights, the Puget Sound's chill numbing the sting of betrayal. I wasn't mourning my job at Nexora. I was mourning the insult, the arrogance of a man who'd never written a line of code, dismissing 7 years of my sweat as redundant. By Saturday morning, my mind was clear sharp as the Seattle skyline against a rare blue sky. I pulled my employment contract from a locked drawer in my apartment, its pages worn but precise. There it was in black and white, the patent for Nexora's back-end system registered under my name, Penelope Harper, US 9347901B. A licensing agreement allowed Nexora to use it, but only with my explicit consent for renewals, updates, or scaling. That agreement expired at midnight Sunday, a detail Max hadn't bothered to check. I let out a small laugh, not from amusement, but from the sheer poetry of it. The system running 82% of Nexora's operations, scheduling CRM APIs, client portals was mine, and they'd just fired the key holder. I spent the afternoon drafting an email, every word measured, no trace of the adrenaline pulsing through me. From my personal Gmail, I wrote to Nexora's legal department subject line, Notice of Intellectual Property Usage Expiration, immediate attention required. I outlined the facts, the patent, the licensing terms, and the expiration at midnight Sunday. Without renegotiation directly with me, continued use would breach IP law, triggering legal consequences. I kept it professional, no drama signing it. Penelope Harper, inventor, Nexora backend architecture, V23 patent US 9347901B. I CC'd the general counsel, the old CTO, and yes, Max. Then I hit send, closed my laptop, and felt the weight shift. This wasn't revenge, it was leverage I needed to move to burn off the tension coiling in my chest. I laced up my running shoes and hit the streets, a 4-mile loop through Seattle's foggy Capitol Hill, dodging early tourists and street vendors. The rhythm of my steps matched my thoughts, precise, deliberate, unstoppable. With every stride I shed the sting of Max's words, which peaked years ago, and felt my focus sharpen. I wasn't just a fired employee, I was the architect of Nexora's survival, and they were about to learn what that meant. As I slowed near my apartment, sweat mingling with the mist, I glanced at my phone. No replies yet. Good, let them sleep on it. Sunday passed quietly, my phone silent until the afternoon. Then it lit up 2 missed calls from an unknown number, a voicemail from HR asking to clarify my separation, another from legal requesting a call. Late that night, an email from Max landed, subject, urgent contract misunderstanding. His words dripped with forced calm. Penelope, I believe there's been a miscommunication. Let's resolve this before Monday. I didn't respond. Let them walk into work tomorrow and find their systems dark. Their clients locked out, their world unraveling. I didn't want chaos for chaos's sake. I wanted respect, and if it came wrapped in panic, so be it. By Sunday night, I was ready. I sat on my couch, a cup of coffee cooling beside me. My laptop open to the patent documents. I reviewed every clause, every date, ensuring my position was ironclad. The city hummed outside my window, oblivious to the storm I'd set in motion. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, a programmer debugging a system, except this time the bug was Max. Tomorrow, Nexora will see what happened when you erased the person who built your foundation. I closed my eyes, the Puget Sound's distant rhythm in my ears, and waited for Monday. Monday morning broke over Seattle like a glitch in the Matrix, the city's gray skyline mirroring the chaos I knew was unfolding at Nexora Systems. I'd spent Sunday night imagining their servers, stuttering client dashboards, blank Max's smug grin unraveling. My email to legal had been a fuse, and today it ignited. I sat in my apartment, sipping black coffee, watching the clock tick toward 8 a.m., the official start of Nexora's workday. By 8:07, my inbox erupted, system, error alerts, urgent please. Max's name in all caps. I leaned back, pulse steady, and let the storm rage. This wasn't sabotage. It was a consequence, and I was its architect. The first email came from IT backend, authentication failed, urgent. Then another from a product manager, clients can't access dashboards. Penelope, please call. Max's was the third, a single line, "Emma, please call me now." He'd used the wrong name, a slip that made me smile, sharp and fleeting. I didn't call. My phone buzzed with voicemails, HR legal, a junior engineer. I'd mentored her voice. Shaky. Penelope, the whole system's down. What's happening? I let them stack each one a brick in the wall Max had built around himself. Nexora's lifeblood scheduling CRM APIs, client portals ran on my patented system, and without my consent, it was legally dead. I sipped my coffee, the Puget Sound glinting outside my window, and waited for them to feel the weight. By 8:30, I was ready to step into the fire. I dressed deliberately, black blazer, crisp white shirt heels, that clicked with purpose, and drove to Nexora's downtown headquarters, a glass tower looming over Fifth Avenue. I didn't use the employee entrance, the one I'd slipped through for 7 years, with a travel mug and laptop bag. Today, I walked through the front lobby, my heels echoing across the marble floor, a sound that turned heads. The receptionist, a young woman named Claire, blinked when she saw me. "Ms. Harper." She stammered, her hand hovering over the phone. I smiled, calm as a still lake. "I have a meeting with legal." She nodded, dialing quickly, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the office's panic. The elevator ride to the 7th floor was silent, my reflection sharp in the mirrored doors. I wasn't here to beg for my job. I was here to negotiate as the patent holder, the one they couldn't erase. The legal conference room was stark, all glass and steel, with the general counsel, Mr. Whitaker, flanked by 2 associates and a senior advisor from an old merger. Max was conspicuously absent. Whitaker stood, his handshake firm, but his eyes wary. "Penelope, thank you for coming," he said, voice smooth but clipped. "We want to resolve this amicably." I took the seat at the table's far end, letting them come to me. "I'm all for clean resolutions," I replied. "I assume you've reviewed the licensing agreement." He nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Your claims are valid, the patent's yours, and the renewal expired at midnight as stated. We'd like to propose a retroactive extension, 1 year, same terms, full access." I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve. "That won't work for me." A murmur rippled through the room, the advisor scribbling furiously. "I'm not here for old terms." I continued, voice steady. "I'm here to renegotiate. Your systems are down, correct. Client platforms, internal reporting, developer access, all offline." Whitaker hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." I leaned forward, my gaze locking with his. "Then let's talk numbers. I want $12 million for the next 12 months, non-exclusive renewable quarterly full system support through me or my approved team, and a public acknowledgement of my patent in company records." The silence was thick, their faces a mix of shock and calculation. An associate cleared her throat. "That's a significant increase." I didn't blink. "It's reflective of value, something this company's forgotten how to measure. Every hour of downtime erodes client trust, your stock, and your reputation." I'd move quickly. Whitaker leaned back, exhaling. "We'll need to take this to the board." I nodded, standing. "I'll wait. But time's not your friend today." They didn't argue their urgency, palpable as I stepped into the hallway, clutching a bottle of water. My phone on silent. Max found me there, pacing near the glass-walled offices, his tie slightly askew. He froze when he saw me, his confident mask cracking. "Penelope," he said, forcing civility, "I didn't expect you here in person." I met his gaze, unflinching. "You didn't expect a lot of things, Max." He shoved his hands in his pockets, aiming for casual. "This has gone too far. We should have talked before lawyers got involved." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean before you fired me? That was your choice based on ego, not facts. Now you're dealing with the fallout." His jaw tightened, but I pressed on. "I've documented everything, your emails, my patent, the licensing terms. I'm not here to argue, I'm here to negotiate. Let legal do their job and maybe you'll salvage yours." I turned, my heels clicking as I walked away, but not before adding, "Good luck." His pause told me he was rattled, but I didn't look back. The hallway buzzed with whispers, employees stealing glances, the air thick with the kind of fear that follows a system crash. I stood by the elevator, my heart thudding not with doubt, but with focus. I'd lit the match and Nexora was burning, but I wasn't done. This was just the beginning, and I was ready for the next move. The hallway outside Nexora's legal conference room hummed with the kind of nervous energy that follows a blackout, the air thick with whispered theories and sidelong glances. I stood by the elevator, my water bottle cool against my palm, replaying Max's faltering expression as I'd left him grasping for control. My demand $12 million quarterly renewals, public acknowledgement had landed like a shockwave, and now the board was scrambling. Seattle's skyline loomed through the glass walls, a reminder of the stakes beyond this tower. I wasn't just fighting for my patent. I was rewriting the rules of respect, and I could feel the tide turning. Back in my car, parked a block from Nexora's headquarters, I checked my phone. No new emails, but a text from Nicole, my old friend in Product Max is losing it. The whole system's still down, clients are calling non-stop, boards looped in. I smiled, not out of spite, but clarity. The system crash wasn't my doing. It was Max's ignorance, and every unanswered client call was his signature. I drove home the Puget Sound, a silver ribbon in the distance, and planned my next move. Legal could haggle, but the board held the real power, and I knew how to reach them. I'd kept the board chair's email from a cloud migration project 3 years ago, a quiet connection most had forgotten. It was time to use it. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, the Seattle rain tapping my window, and composed an email to the chair. Margaret Ellison, subject, Re-System, Licensing and Leadership Oversight. My tone was surgical, no trace of the adrenaline thrumming in my veins. I outlined the patent's scope. 82% of Nexora's operations from APIs to client dashboards, and the licensing expiration Max had ignored. I detailed my termination, his failure to review IP obligations, and his attempt to spin the crisis as a miscommunication. I closed with a question sharp but respectful. If this is how your CEO handles internal assets, how will he manage regulators or partners? I attached my original licensing notice, the patent filing, and Max's dismissal email, a paper trail no one could dispute. I hit send, my breath steady, knowing this would shift the game. By evening, my phone pinged with a reply, not from Margaret, but a senior board liaison, Thomas Reed, Penelope. Thank you for your clarity and professionalism. We take this seriously and are reviewing your documentation. We support your licensing terms and expect finalization within 48 hours. We regret the oversight of your contributions. I read it twice, the words sinking in. Not an apology, but a crack in Nexora's armor, a sign the board saw Max's failure for what it was. I leaned back, the rain's rhythm syncing with my pulse. This wasn't just about money or credit. It was about accountability, and I was closer than ever. Tuesday morning brought a new buzz. Nicole texted again. Interns are calling you. The firewall Max is telling the board you hid the license expiration. Total lie, your memos are everywhere. I laughed softly, picturing Max's frantic spin, his tailored suit, no shield against the truth. My email, CC'd to legal, before the deadline, was a public record within Nexora's servers, a fact even the interns knew. The office Slack channels, Nicole said, were ablaze with memes comparing the shutdown to a digital Watergate. I didn't reply, but the news fueled me. Max's lies were crumbling and the board was watching. At 10 a.m. my phone rang. Margaret Ellison herself. Her voice was measured professional, but laced with urgency. Penelope, we'd like you to join a closed board session tomorrow at 11. Your insight is critical. I paused, letting the weight of her words settle. 2 days ago I was redundant. Now I was critical. I'll be there, I said, my tone even. As I hung up, I felt the shift like code compiling without errors. The board wasn't just addressing my patent. They were questioning Max's leadership, and I was the key to their verdict. I spent the rest of the day preparing, not just for the meeting, but for the moment I'd walk back into Nexora, not as an employee, but as a force. I reviewed my notes, the patent's legal weight, and the system's impact, $300 million in annual revenue tied to my architecture. I practiced my delivery, keeping it calm, factual, and undeniable. Outside, Seattle's clouds parted briefly, sunlight glinting off the Space Needle. I stood at my window, heart steady, mind sharp. Max had underestimated me, but the board wouldn't. Tomorrow I'd step into their room and show them what real authority looked like. Not bluster, but proof etched in code and contract. As night fell, I sat on my couch, a glass of water in hand, the city's hum a distant pulse. The board session loomed, a chance to turn crisis into reckoning. I wasn't nervous. I was ready, my leverage as solid as the system I'd built. Max could spin his stories, but I had the truth, and it was louder than his lies. Wednesday morning dawned crisp in Seattle, the kind of day when the air feels charged like a circuit about to spark. I stood in my apartment, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Black dress-tailored blazer hair pulled back tight. The board's invitation to their closed session at 11 a.m. wasn't just a meeting, it was a crucible, and I was ready to forge something new. Max's lies were fraying my email to the chair had shifted the ground, and Nexora's systems were still dark. As I drove to the headquarters, the Space Needle piercing the skyline, I felt no fear. Only focus. Today I'd show them what 7 years of building their foundation meant. I arrived at Nexora's tower at 10:55. Bypassing the employee entrance again for the main lobby, my heels striking the marble with a rhythm that felt like a countdown. The receptionist Claire gave me a quick nod, her eyes wide with something like awe. "Top floor, Ms. Harper," she said, her voice hushed. The elevator hummed as it climbed to the executive boardroom, a space I'd entered only once before, years ago, to pitch a system upgrade. Back then I'd been a shadow in the corner. Today I stepped out with purpose, my folder of notes in hand, and walked straight to the chair reserved for me. No hesitation, the boardroom was all mahogany and glass. Seattle's skyline framing the 10 members seated around the table, Margaret Ellison. The chair nodded as I entered, her expression unreadable. Max sat opposite, arms crossed, his phone, face down like a surrendered weapon. His tie was flawless, but his eyes betrayed him. Worry, not confidence. Margaret opened with formalities, her voice steady. "Penelope, thank you for joining. We've reviewed your documentation and terms. We'd like your perspective before we deliberate." I stood unfolding my notes, but not reading them, and met each board member's gaze, my voice clear as cut glass. "Leadership isn't about flash," I began. "It's about understanding the systems, technical and human, that keep a company alive." When Max arrived, he had a choice: learn or lead blindly. He chose blindness. Max shifted his jaw tight, but I pressed on. He fired me without a performance review, called my work outdated, and ignored the patent that powers your revenue. He only acted when clients couldn't log in, when your stock wobbled. That's not leadership, it's damage control. I paused, letting the silence settle. I built a system to protect Nexora, but no code can shield you from a leader who doesn't value the people behind it. If your CEO can't see that, you're not just legally exposed, you're structurally flawed. The room stilled, a board member's pen, frozen mid-note. Margaret leaned forward. "If you were in Max's seat, what would you do?" I smiled faintly. Unshaken. I wouldn't be in his seat. I'd be beside someone who knows products, respects culture, and reads contracts. I'd build trust, not titles, and I'd never let ego blind me to the people who keep this company standing. A murmur rippled approval in some eyes, tension in others. Margaret cleared her throat. "Thank you, Penelope. Please wait outside." I nodded, leaving my notes on the table, and stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me. 10 minutes later, raised voices leaked through the wall, Max's sharp and defensive blaming, legal the CTO, even the weather for his oversight. I stood by a window, Seattle's ferries dotting the sound, and felt a calm certainty. His deflections were a dying signal, drowned out by my evidence. At 11:47, Margaret emerged, her face composed. "Penelope, please join us again privately." I followed her back inside. Max was gone, his chair empty. She sat folding her hands, effective immediately. "Maxwell Granger is on administrative leave pending review. We're issuing a statement recognizing your patent and leadership in resolving this crisis." She slid a draft across the table. I read aloud, voice steady. "We acknowledge Penelope Harper's innovation and intellectual property as vital to Nexora's success." The words hit me harder than I expected, a validation not just for me, but for every woman in tech who'd been erased. "How would you like to proceed?" Margaret asked. I leaned forward. "I've agreed to the licensing. $1, $2 million quarterly. As stated, I'll consult for 90 days to stabilize the system with no full-time return. And I want a framework to protect employees, IP reviews during transitions, whistleblower channels, mentorship for junior staff." She nodded. "Consider it. Done." As I stood, she added, "Penelope, You didn't just save the system, you saved us. I walked out, the weight of days lifting, not gone, but lighter, like a program finally debugged. In the hallway, Nicole waited, her grin wide. He's suspended, she whispered. I nodded. For now, it's a start. She laughed, eyes bright. You're a legend, Pen. I smiled, glancing at the office beyond, where employees moved with a new energy, fear, giving way to possibility. The boardroom had been my stage, but this, the shift in the air, the truth laid bare, was my victory. I wasn't done yet. I'd consult, I'd protect, and I'd make sure no one else was dismissed, like I'd been. As I stepped into the elevator, Seattle's skyline gleaming, I knew this wasn't the end. It was a reckoning, and I was its author. The air in Nexora's Seattle headquarters felt different by Friday, like a server room after a reboot, quiet but alive with new signals. At 2:03 p.m., the internal announcement went live, a digital thunderclap. Max Granger suspended pending investigation. Penelope Harper, architect of the core system, formally recognized. I stood outside the building, watching employees stream out their cautious smiles and quick nods. A silent chorus of change. I didn't crave their applause. I craved the shift, a culture where competence couldn't be erased by ego. As I drove home, the Puget Sound shimmering under a rare sun, I felt the pieces of my fight settling not into closure, but into purpose. The following Monday, I met with Nexora's legal team, not to douse fires, but to build safeguards. I proposed a framework, mandatory IP audits during leadership changes, anonymous reporting channels tied to the board, and a mentorship program to empower junior engineers to claim their work. They agreed, their pens moving as fast as my words. I signed a 90-day consulting contract. My terms clear, autonomy, no full-time tether. The office buzzed with whispers of my return, but I was no longer theirs. I was mine, a truth carved in the code I'd protected. Weeks later, outside a meeting, a young intern approached, her glasses slipping down her nose. Ms. Harper, she asked, voice tentative. You're why I spoke up in a code review yesterday. Everyone's talking about you in Slack. I smiled, genuine warmth breaking through my reserve. Don't stop speaking, I told her. Your voice is your patent. She beamed, jogging off, and I stood there, struck by a feeling deeper than pride legacy. I'd built more than a system. I'd lit a spark for those who'd come after. That weekend, I took a train to Portland, the Cascades blurring past my phone off for the first time in months. In a quiet car, I journaled. I didn't fight for power. I fought for a place where worth isn't negotiable. News trickled in. Max's suspension became permanent. Nexora's training now included IP awareness, and credit was woven into milestones. I started my consulting firm in Seattle, selecting clients who valued systems that lasted and people who built them. A letter from Margaret arrived, handwritten. Penelope, you redefined authority by standing firm. I tucked it away, a reminder of the table I'd built, not begged for. To anyone sidelined, labeled difficult for knowing their value, I say this. You don't need to roar. You need to stand unshaken. Your truth sharper than any dismissal. When they try to silence you, they hand you the match. Light it and let your work burn bright. Mine did, and Seattle's skyline glittering as I returned was proof, my name, my system, my story etched where no one could erase it.